Hello everyone. Hopefully we are live. I had a little last minute glitch, but I think it's all set, probably because kids are home on vacation and had to run upstairs and ask everyone to get off the internet. We're going to be working with watercolor mediums today. I had been cleaning and noticing that I had a few and I rarely use them, so I thought I would get them out and kind of show you what you can do with them, and then you can determine whether it's something you might want for your stash or not. You don't need to have them to paint this though. It'll be fine without them, but you can see you get some interesting texture when you use texture medium, and that's what we're going to focus on. But then I thought, well, I also have iridescent medium, and that's just something you can add to any of your colors of watercolor paint to have a metallic or a shimmer watercolor paint. So that's kind of handy, especially for holiday cards and, you know, anytime where you're going to be interacting with the artwork and it's not between you and glass. So it's just a kind of a fun medium to have. And then we're also going to go over Oxgall and masking fluid and gum arabic, because I do get questions about those sometimes. And then it will be kind of a little bit more all-encompassing for watercolor mediums. I don't have granulation medium, however, the texture medium does act quite a bit like granulation medium. So if anybody in the chat wants to chime in about granulation medium and enlighten anybody else, that would be totally awesome, or leave a comment afterwards. And I'm in the studio with Sarah.
Hi.
And we both had a lovely Thanksgiving. And
we did.
We hope that you did too. And since it is Black Friday, I did put a Black Friday sale. I'm offering 50% off gift certificate classes. So you can buy a class for a friend for half price. And I've also, if you use the coupon code Black Friday, you can save 50% on the classes in my online store. There are links in the video description so you can find everything I'm talking about pretty easily. There's also a pattern on my blog and also linked in the description so you can trace the seal picture that we're going to be painting, because I thought the texture on this would be perfect for some of the mediums we're looking at. Do you have anything to add?
No.
All right, cool. And just excuse any noises you might hear, because the kids are home.
The whole family's here today.
Yes. So if you're looking at mediums, there are many different watercolor manufacturers make mediums. A medium is basically something you add to your paint to give it a different sort of effect. So even in the category of medium, they also have masking fluids. Masks are a little bit different. Masks and resists usually protect your paper so that you can keep the whites without having to use white paint. This is the one I use. It's Winsor & Newton Art Masking Fluid. Now, when I get a bottle of this is a big bottle and it lasts a long time. So what I do is I pour it into a smaller container. I used to use film canister containers for this back when, you know, we used film. Don't have those kicking around anymore, but everyone always had those hanging around. But now I just put them in this little bottle, and I was able to actually use this fine tip applicator to make really really fine lines. And I'm going to show you this in action because I think it would be really nice for the whiskers on our seal here. Now the problem with this, and I know you can get pens that have masking fluid in it, sometimes it doesn't want to come out very well, and sometimes it does. So, you know, it is a little finicky. I know some companies make them that have the have a little applicator like that, and I haven't used those, but that's what I'm going to do with this. And I'm just drawing with it like a pen, and you have to let that completely dry before you go over it. So that's why I wanted to get this done right off the bat. If you get a blob that's too big, you can just kind of peel it off before you start painting. Like I got way too much there, so I'm actually going to try blotting that off, and then I can rub off any excess and reapply it. I got a little heavy-handed there, so I'm just going to blot that a little bit too. So you don't want to heat set any of this that you do with masking fluid, because if you heat it, you could bake it onto the paper. So you got to be very careful if you're going to use a hairdryer or anything like that. And if you don't have this, you can always go in later with a white gel pen and put those whiskers in. This is handy though if you think you might want to put your work in competition and you want it to be a pure watercolor. So another medium that we have is texture medium. And a couple of years ago, actually it was quite a few years ago, my sister and I got the big bottles like this of the texture medium and the iridescent medium, and we split them. So I put mine in these little washed out bottles that used to hold baby Tylenol, and it works great. So a little goes a long way. I would honestly start with like a little trial set, because that's going to last you so long. And like only if you're using tons of it, go in with the big bottles, because that's just so much media. I mean, I've had this for many years and I haven't even come close to to using it up. So for the iridescent medium, you can use these to make your own sparkly pens, like the Spectrum sparkle pens or the Wink of Stella sparkle pens. It's very similar to the stuff that's in there. You can mix it with any of your colors to make a metallic paint, and you can use it on its own. You can go add like iridescent touches to paintings after they're all completed. The only caveat to this is once you frame it under and you have that barrier of glass between the viewer and the painting, it loses, you don't see as much of the sparkle. So that's the only thing to consider with that. And texture medium can be mixed with your paint, or it can be dropped into your paint for a variety of effects. So for this one here, and you can still lift your paint off, which is nice. It's a watercolor medium. It's not an acrylic, so it doesn't dry permanently and it doesn't ruin your brushes, although you do want to rinse them out when you're done. So here I wet a rectangle of paper and I put in ultramarine blue and burnt sienna and just kind of let them mix together, and then I dropped in some of the texture medium and stirred that in with my brush, and I got this nice granular surface. It's got a little bit of touchable texture to it, but it's more of it's not like raised up that much. You can feel it almost feels a little sandpapery there. And here I made my square of paint, and then I just dropped in the colors, and I really like that effect because it kind of gives you the look of like barnacles on a rock. And on this one here, I actually painted the texture medium on the paper, let it dry, and then I went over it with my paint, and that gives you probably one of the best lifting capabilities too. So if you want to lift back to the white of your paper, because you have that barrier of the texture medium, it comes right back, it comes right off. So that's really handy. And on this one, I mixed the medium and the paint right on my palette, and then I applied it to the square. I don't like this one quite as much. I feel like you get two areas that's more uniform. Once you have the texture medium in the paint, it slows down its movement, so you're not going to get as good blending or as good flow. So just kind of keep that in mind and experiment. And I will show you my palette where I have that dried paint. It almost looks like a granulation medium here. So I think those two might be very similar as far as properties. I don't have granulation medium, so I don't have that to show you, but we'll work with what I have. And Oxgall, I had some liquid Oxgall, but I don't know what happened to it. Oxgall is a detergent. If it's real Oxgall, it comes from the gallbladder of cows. If it's synthetic Oxgall, like this one, which is a Lucas product, it is made with like a soap, basically, and it breaks the surface tension of your water so your paint can flow. And we're going to use all of these in the painting just so you can kind of get an idea. Gum arabic is simply the binder that your watercolor is made with. So they take pigment and gum arabic and sometimes some extenders, and that's how they make watercolor paint. This will increase your transparency and gloss of your color. So if your colors seem dull, add some of this to it and it will make it much glossier and easier to lift. So I like to also take this and mix it with mica powders to make my own iridescent paint, or you can mix it with like the Dollar Tree mica eyeshadows and make your own iridescent paint, and it will re-wet on your palette even. So it's a great reusable product. What I don't recommend for gum arabic is the powdered stuff unless you're going to just mix up enough to use right now. It seems like this stuff will mold if you mix it up with water and leave it. So I would just use this for a just for an immediate use. I think it's meant for mixing more with like your mica powders and then like stamping an image, dusting it on, and then it kind of helps bond the mica. I don't think it works that great to mix it with water and use it that way, unless you're going to use it right up. Whew, okay. I think we're going to start. I think I'll start. I got to start away from the masking fluid. Otherwise, I'm going to have a mess there in my hands. Or I could actually maybe I'll just work on this pad of paper to show you each of these fluids in action, because I have to wait for that masking fluid to dry. I should have done that ahead of time, but I wasn't thinking straight. So we're going to first have a look at our texture medium. And you can use your regular watercolor brushes, which is nice. You don't have to have special brushes for this. With your masking fluid, I would recommend you have a cheap brush, but for texture medium, I won't worry about it too much. So I'm just going to wet an area, and I'm going to drop in my paint. And I like to use a paint that's got a little bit of granulation in it anyway, like ultramarine blue. The paints I'm using are the 24 set from Winsor & Newton, and I have linked that up in the video description. And some burnt sienna. Those two colors together make a really nice earthy neutral. We'll be using these on the seal that we paint. Alright, so we've got this pretty wet, and I am just going to drop in some of the texture medium. I actually really like having that in these dropper bottles, because I can just drop the stuff in. I don't have to dip a brush in. It almost feels like baking soda, like the texture of it. I bet you could kind of DIY your own thing too. So just by dropping the texture medium down, we get kind of like a it almost looks like you've dropped alcohol down, except you've got like this more of a crusty texture to the edges of it. And then I would just kind of mix it in a little bit with your brush, and that way you can still get a little bit of flow from your paint. But you can see how it really stops the paint from flowing once it gets mixed in there, because it really thickens it and makes it really textured. And it really doesn't look like much until it's dry. That's why I had the samples dried, so you can kind of see. And that's would be the example right there. Before, that's where we started with, like, that example. When it dries, if you left it just dripped in, that's what it would look like. And this is what it's going to look like when it's dry from the technique we just did. So if you did a rock and then you wanted to highlight on the rock, you could go in when it's dry and you could lift up that highlight. Just don't lift off as much as that if you want a softer highlight. So there's a lot of options there, and I think it's pretty fun.
We had a question back when you're using the pen with the masking fluid.
Yes.
Kendall McCauley wanted to know, wouldn't that tip scratch the paper?
You're not really pressing it in, and the paper's dry you're working on, so it would be just like writing on it with a pencil. If it was wet paper, it would, but you wouldn't be applying masking fluid to wet paper because it wouldn't bond. The next one we'll do is iridescent medium, and I'm actually going to turn my palette around so I can mix some right in with my paint. And I think the iridescent medium works best with paint that's more transparent and more staining, because it won't dull the color. So I'm just going to put a little bit on my palette right there. You can see it looks very pearlescent. It's just like gum arabic and mica powder. So you can kind of see it just kind of looks very pearly. And so that's a medium you could totally make yourself if you had mica powder. And I am just going to use that same brush I was using, and I think I'll grab some purple because it's a nice transparent color. And I'll mix some of that iridescent medium in there. Try not to put too much water in because the iridescent medium is pretty liquid. And this would give you an effect very similar to like the Wink of Luna or Wink of Stella pens. And if you got a good, like a fine tip brush and you knew how to do brush lettering, you could do that. And again, it doesn't really show up too well until it's dry because the glare from the water wants to kind of take over the whole thing. But that's where you want to use your very transparent colors.
Shauna Musin, would my painting still be considered a transparent watercolor / traditional if I only watercolor paint regardless of my substrate or what I have underneath?
She's asking if she only used watercolor.
I guess if she but
the surface, is that what she's talking?
Yeah, if she used a different type of surface, but she's still just using watercolor, it still would be considered a traditional watercolor.
Gee, I've never had that question. It's always about the media. I think it would be because some watercolorists watercolor on vellum, which is an animal skin, and some use like watercolor canvas, and some people put watercolor ground on things. I think it just has to do with the paint. I think it would, but if I would definitely contact any competition that you're going to enter first. So we can take a look at those when they're dry, but I can show you the samples I did with the iridescent medium already, just so you can kind of see. I tip it to the light. Depending on how much you put in there, you're going to get more or less shine. The purple, I must have had a little bit less because that's not as shiny as the other ones. And this one I did a wet wash and dropped the medium into it, and I got a really nice shimmery effect there.
Bev Roberts, would the texture medium work well on soft pressed paper for an area that you wanted rough? Example for rocks.
Yeah, that's a great way to use it. All right, so now I want to demonstrate the Oxgall because that has a very interesting effect. I am going to just wet an area here with water, and then I'm going to mix some Oxgall right into that. So you generally don't mix this in with your paint. A lot of paint has some sort of Oxgall in it. Some brands notoriously do not. I think Lucas might not have Oxgall in the paint. Let's see. There's a couple, maybe Holbein doesn't have Oxgall. I know there's a few that do not contain Oxgall. And some contain synthetic Oxgall, and that's what this is. probably a traditional Oxcal is going to give you a greater effect. Also, something to mention about these pans is you want to let them dry out really good when you're done, because they seem to stay kind of mushy and wet longer than other pans. So now what I'm going to do is just grab some paint and just drop it in there, and you can see how it moves when you have Oxcal in there. Well, geez, that's not moving any better than theoretically. Let's try some of that ultramarine, because that was really moving well on its own. Oh, maybe I have too much, because that doesn't seem like it's moving any more than my regular stuff. We'll try mixing it in with a paint and adding that in there. We'll see if that works any better, because I don't feel like that's moving any more. I feel it's moving less. So let's try adding it into my paint on the palette and see what we get. So I'm just going to take some of this right off the pan, add it right in there. Now I'm going to wet the paper. We'll see how that works. We're all learning together. I honestly don't use mediums all that much. I stick to the paint pretty much on its own, but it's nice to know. Oh, there we go. Yeah, mix it in with your paint. Look how good that goes.
Ooh, there we go.
I stand corrected, guys.
Mary Shen,
whoa, look at
could you
that.
make a pan of dry Oxcal by putting some liquid Oxcal into a pan and letting it dry?
You know, I don't know. I do have a little tube not a tube, a little bottle of liquid Oxcal, because it came with a marbling kit, but I couldn't find it when right before I turned on the camera, and it's really clear. I don't think it would harden up like that. Maybe it would, but since this is synthetic, I honestly think it's kind of like a bar of soap. You could try it. I don't know. It doesn't seem like it would harden up. But yeah, that mixing it in with the paint really really made the difference there. So I know you can put it in your rinse water too. So like if you do like a 2-jar system, which you probably do when you are when you're watercoloring, put it in your clean water and then just grab that for washes, because that really flowed a lot more when I put it in with the paint. So there's that. And again, the gum arabic is just the glue that comes in the paint. You can add it to your paint if it feels a little chalky, you want it to be glossier or more transparent. And the masking fluid, I showed you that at the beginning. So now we can begin on our demonstration here, which is available on my blog or link in the video description if you want to print that out. Hoping this is dry enough. I have a couple little whiskers there that I kind of want to remove, but my fingers seem to be dirty. I'll grab my...
Mary shows, would soap do what the Oxcal does?
It will. The only consideration, depending on the soap that you're using, is that it might be... Usually soap is basic, so hopefully it wouldn't hurt your paper, but some may hurt your paper. So, or make it degrade over time. But if you're just playing and, just trying to get an effect, like for a card that, doesn't need to last 100 years, give it a try. All right, so the first effect I want to work with is the texture medium. And so I'm going to begin by doing a, because I think I really like this example like we did on the paper. So I'm going to begin by wetting the seals. I'm just going to go ahead and wet both of them, because I know once I start adding the texture medium to them, that paint is not going to want to go anywhere. So we're just going to wet it like we're going to do a wash. I'm not going to go in the mouth. I'm just going to go the skin area. And actually, I want to just do this. We'll start off just by doing the seal back here, the furthest away one from us. And because they're slightly a different color. I've only seen like seals off the coast of Maine a couple times. But I see people get pictures with tons of them together. It's like, where are you finding all the seals? We saw a bunch when we went to Campobello Island. Porpoises, too. They look like dolphins. All right, so the colors for this, we're going to use ultramarine blue, and we are going to use burnt sienna. I'm going to flip my palette around so I can get to the other side where I have those colors already. I apologize for the noise if it comes through on video. The furnace just started going. Now you can see I'm like putting this right into my palette where I had my other texture medium, and it is lifting up the other texture medium. So it is a watercolor medium. If you say have acrylic medium and you're thinking, geez, I don't want to go buy another medium, but I do want to have fun and try this, go ahead, but I wouldn't mix it on your watercolor palette. Mix it on like a plate or something, that because you wouldn't want to get like acrylic mediums into your watercolor pans because they would form a skin, and then you wouldn't be able to re-wet them. So go ahead and experiment if you want to, but just make sure that you don't get it anywhere near where it's going to get into your pans and dry there.
Kendall McCauley, you had mentioned to me using Oxgal to mix with Cotman paints to make them less chalky. Is it Oxgal or gum arabic I should be using?
Gum, well, you can use both. The Oxgal is going to make them flow better, and the gum arabic is going to make them more transparent and luminous. With the Cotman though, and the gum arabic, just be careful not to add too much, or you might get it streaky, because it's going to want to make it lift, because it does help it like not, it almost creates like a barrier so it doesn't sink into the paper so much. It increases the viscosity slightly as well. So if you just use gum arabic, it would flow worse probably than it does already. But you could do some Oxgal in your mixing water, a little bit of gum arabic, but I really don't find the Cotmans to be terribly chalky. There's some student grade paints that are really, really chalky, but I never found Cotmans to be all that bad. They almost get a little gelatinous, I find. What do they have on my paper? Oh, I was like, what's on my paper? It's the watermark. It says Arches. I'm like, what is that? Do I get a hair in there? And these colors actually will granulate pretty well on their own, so if you don't have the medium, don't fret, just paint it regular, because these colors do have a little granulating ability. I also want to put in some either yellow ochre or raw sienna. I think I'm going to do raw sienna just because I always use yellow ochre, so I think I'll just do this because it's a little different. But either one is fine. It's funny that both of those colors are on this palette. I think it's because they're very traditional colors, and Winsor & Newton is a very traditional paint company. And I'm painting on the right side of the Arches paper, but if you wanted a little bit darker, you could paint on the wrong side, the back side, and there is a little more texture to that side of the paper. And it's sized on both sides, so you can use either one. So now that I've got these lovely colors in, which I kind of almost hate to do anything to them because I really love the way they're blending, I'm going to add some texture medium. So the reason that I have these in the small bottles is because I split them with my sister, but the reason I put the masking fluid in a small bottle is because it will make it last longer. And Winsor & Newton masking fluid, I find, lasts a lot longer than other brands that I've tried. So, you know, that's why I haven't tried any of the Mascapens and all those other, like, kind of fancier, newer things, is because I'm still working through that bottle of masking fluid I bought like 10 years ago. So now I'm going to gently go with my paintbrush and just kind of work that in. I don't want to overmix it and have just one color. So that's why I'm doing it now, because I like the blending that I got, and this is just going to kind of impart that texture. Do you have any questions while
No, we're all caught up for the moment.
Awesome.
We have Joe and Val and Grace and Eve.
Good.
So we have a lot of our regulars that have a lot, and Alexandra's here. So we have a lot of our regulars that have been pitching in with questions.
Oh, good.
Getting them answered.
Yeah, and chances are they probably use the mediums more than I do. I bet Joe probably has a
Joe actually
shelf
just said
full.
he used for gum arabic. If you have dried tube paint that you want to relocate, you use the gum arabic to glue the dried paint to the palette.
Oh yes, that's a really good tip.
Lisa Bjork, I have watercolors that are probably 20 years old. They are high quality. Do the watercolors expire?
Oh no, they'll be fine. As long as they're not all nasty moldy, and even if they are nasty moldy, if you can like get the mold off of them, they're fine. I am going to see if I can add a little more color to some areas here. And you can see how it doesn't want to flow.
almost looks like you put glue over it. Like
yeah,
a thin
doesn't
layer
it?
Mod Podge.
Yeah.
Just from where it looks on my screen.
Yeah, it definitely slows down the movement. But now I can go in and put these kind of like little spots on the seal. So it can be a time saver in that effect. I'm just trying to tip it now and then so it's hopefully not getting too glary for you guys. I recently added more lights to the studio to hopefully get better quality, but then sometimes everything just gets glary. Jackson came in the other day. He's like, "How can you see? It's blinding in here."
Well, he is part cave dweller.
That's true. That's why I'm so perky. It's like I'm on the beach every day.
You're getting
I've got,
all
like-
sorts of vitamin D and
Yeah.
natural light, even when it's winter.
But it must not be the bad kind, because I'm still pale as a ghost, so I'm not getting a suntan down here. Oh, I'm really loving the texture of this, though. I feel like it's really capturing the texture of the seal skin really well. Now, I'd say probably one of the disadvantages of mediums in any sort of painting is that they can kind of take away the spontaneity, because you kind of have to plan a little bit and know you're going to use them and know how they're going to affect other paints around where you're working. So that's just something to, to kind of think about. So if you do have a friend that you can split up a set with, even a trial set, like the one I linked to in the video description, that might be a good idea, because then you can see if you really like them before you invest, or just invest in the ones that you're really going to use. And sometimes your other crafts, if you do multi-crafts, would have some of these products. Like if you do paper marbleizing, you might have Oxgall. You might have gum arabic from other projects. I'm going to go right in on the nose too with some of that darker color. Okay, now we're going to skip over to the seal in the front, who's quite a bit lighter. Clean my brush off, and I'm going to again wet the seal. I wonder what the difference between a seal and a sea lion is. Are sea lions bigger?
I think so, and I think seals are like up in the colder parts.
Ah,
like they're up
okay.
in the north, Antarctica or South Pole or whatever. And I think
Maine.
sea lions are more. Those are where you find like California, like the warmer coastal waters.
I'd be a sea lion. Be in the warm coastal water.
Gail Robertson, what does Lindsay use for her journal?
I have several. It really depends on what I'm using. For watercolor only, I use the Daler Rowney Cache sketchbook. It has Aquafine paper in it. It's not my favorite paper, but for a sketchbook, I like it. And because it's hardbound and it protects a little bit better. I also like the Canson Montville hardbound sketchbook, and that again is those are both wood pulp student quality papers, but they work. Those sketchbooks are pretty good. And then for like mixed media, I'll use the Canson XL mixed media, or I'll use the Jane Davenport. I have a Jane Davenport mini one. I prefer the Canson XL just because there's a lot more sheets in there and it's less expensive. And the paper's a little bit smoother, which is what I happen to like when I am doing that mixed media. But they're both good. I think it would just depend on your preference. Going here with the burnt sienna. I don't have any like really high quality sketchbooks. I've made my own before with like arches. But I kind of like cheap sketchbooks because then you're not worried about ruining things when you're out painting on location. I also use the Strathmore Visual Journals, the 140-pound cold press ones. Those aren't very expensive either. And they come in two sizes. I use a 5x7.
Azu Paris, can I use the masking fluid on a dried wash, or does it have to be applied before using watercolor?
You can use it on a dried wash and then paint over it. It's going to just protect whatever you have underneath it. So if you had a bunch of like pale yellow flowers and you masked them off and then you painted over them, you'd be protecting the pale yellow flowers because you've already painted on the white of the paper. If that makes sense? If not, then let me know. I will clarify.
Kim Sargent, sea lions are brown, bark loudly, walk on land using their large flippers, and have visible ear flaps.
Huh.
Seals have small flippers, wriggle on their bellies on land, and lack visible ear flaps.
Oh,
Okay,
thank you.
all right. Sea lions here are bigger and lighter in color and meaner.
Not the playful seals that we have around here.
In liquid color, seals are more blubbery and have small flippers.
Oh, that's Denise in liquid color. Hey, Denise, do I have a seal or a sea lion here? Can you tell me?
What am I painting?
What am I painting?
What am I painting?
She does a lot of beautiful animal art if you want to check out her channel.
Then she would be the person to be able to tell us.
Yes, if you, and anytime you you see somebody in chat there, if you click on the little picture of their face or their channel icon, you can go check out their channel. Yeah, I think you can even subscribe right from the chat, which is handy. You want to check out somebody later. So all I'm doing here is putting in my paint so I can get the values the way that I want them before I put my texture medium in.
Hans Bergalas. I recently tried an old bottle of masking fluid with soap to prevent sticking to the brush, but it wouldn't come off the paper when dry. Is it because of old fluid or using soap or both?
It should still come off. My only thing, maybe it separated in the jar and you've got too much ammonia, because it's like a latex and ammonia usually in the masking fluid. So maybe there wasn't enough latex in it. Maybe it separated. If there were big chunks in there, that could be the culprit. I even had that happen to me. Usually when masking fluid's old, it just kind of really chunks up and you can't even use it. But no, I always soak my brushes up before I use them, so that shouldn't be an issue. I'm going to go in and add some texture medium now. This does seem to make the paint take longer to dry, too, just to give you the heads up there. You can speed the texture medium up with a hairdryer or a heat tool. That won't hurt anything.
Pollage One Art. Would you, Sarah, and your mods consider doing Ask a Watercolor Artist like your format of your former Ask a Crafter series? So missed by many of your subscribers.
Oh, well, you're so funny because I was just talking to Kathy about Ask a Crafter. We are considering bringing it back. I would definitely do an Ask a Watercolorist. In fact, I've talked to Marty Owens and Steve Mitchell from Mind of Watercolor, and we've talked about doing a Ask a Watercolorist too. So yes, we do have things in the works. So stay tuned.
Stay tuned. Let's get through the holidays.
Yeah.
Let's get through Christmas and all that.
Yeah, I'll be happy when my internet seems a little more reliable. Oh boy, I've done so many speed tests this week, and I'm just like, did a internet stream dance before we went live. Again, just trying not to mix my colors up too much, just kind of tap in and integrate this texture medium. I was really surprised because I went to the Winsor & Newton website to see like how do you use texture medium. I've had this bottle forever. I've hardly used it. There's really no instruction. I searched on YouTube. I Googled the general Google search, and I'm just really surprised that there isn't more information.
You know, the texture medium would be good if you were doing like fish underwater, like salmon or something, or like the tropical fish, like octopus.
Oh yeah,
octopi, or
with that pebbly texture.
Yeah.
All right, I really am liking the way that looks. So it may stay a little shinier longer because it does take longer to dry. I'm gonna try to work around into the water while it's drying. Actually, I probably could go in with the heat tool as long as I avoid the masking fluid there. So why don't I do that? If anybody has any questions, go ahead and
no
pop them in the
questions,
chat.
but we have a lot of people getting excited about the possibility of Ask a Crafter coming back
Oh,
and
cool.
Ask the Watercolor.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, that was a lot of fun to do. It was just a lot of work. It was a lot of work to get all the questions, and because back then there was no live streaming, I would take the questions ahead of time and print them out and chop them up and put them in a bowl, because people would get mad at me if their question didn't get answered. So I had to make it completely random. So of course I didn't know what questions were coming out of the bowl. So there could be
a
like
vetting process.
There could be like 3 like almost identical questions. So that was a little it was frustrating because I didn't know how to make I couldn't make everybody happy, and that's what I've learned over the years, is you can't make everybody happy, but
only yourself.
yeah, and I asked for too many opinions, I think. It's like, well, should I do this or should I do that? And then nobody agrees. So I was very confused and frustrated, and I didn't know how to please the most people.
MD Campbell, do you ever combine sets, putting cheaper sets with higher end sets? I think it means watercolor.
Oh yeah, I combine quite a bit, especially before I had so many watercolor sets. When I just had like one big palette, I would squeeze in Cotman paints and Grumbacher Academy and M. Graham and Winsor Newton Professional. Anything I had, I would just keep together in one palette. So yeah, I don't think there's really anything wrong with it. It's just, you know, your painting is only going to be as light fast as, you know, the least light fast color. You know, you might have part of it fade out if you used like a traditional alizarin crimson, and that doesn't have anything to do with what you paid for the paint either, because there are expensive paints that are not light fast, and there are cheap paints that are light fast. So, but yeah, there shouldn't be any problem. Even if they use Aquazol versus Gum Arabic as a binder, there's still no problem mixing them. I'm holding the heat way back because I do not want to I don't want to cook that masking fluid. But I do want to just kind of dry up around it, so I am tempting fate a little bit here. I don't recommend it. I'd recommend you giving it a little time. But I am very respectful of your time, and I don't want you to be watching 20 minutes of paint drying.
Yes, but your perky chatter and positive personality helps the time go quickly. Oh,
thank you. Get this masking fluid off my palette. All right, so we're going to use a little iridescent medium in the water in Marsh Beyond. I think that would be kind of fun. So this is in the reference photo, if you've downloaded it or looked it up. The sea lions are sitting on kind of a grassy knoll, and I think I'd rather have the sea lions sitting on sand. Just because, I don't know, you don't really see, if you're near the beaches where the sea lions are, it seems like they're always on the sand. You usually don't see grass up around them. And so I think that might look a little bit more realistic, but you can do whatever you like. So I'm going to start by painting in some kind of the marshy areas, and I am going to use the same two colors I'd been using, ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. And I'm just going to go in and just paint some kind of streaks. I'm working wet on dry. So this paint, you can see my palette, how it's just kind of dripping around. It's really liquid. It's like skim milk.
Ugh.
Not a fan?
I don't like milk in general, but skim milk's not a favorite.
I don't drink milk either. Just kind of pull some of these wispy lines in. You don't need to do too much. You can always add more. And then for the water, I'm going to take the ultramarine blue in iridescent medium. So I do want to clean off a little spot in my palette. I'm just going to do that over here. And that should use some of the qualities of the iridescent medium quite well, because you'll have that that reflection, and it'll be shimmery, but it'll also reflect light, so you'll see hints of blue because we're going to mix it in with the iridescent medium, as opposed to painting it on top where we just get kind of a white reflection. So I put a little on my palette. I've done this whole painting with a number 12 round. You can switch brushes if you're more comfortable, if you're working bigger or smaller and you need to adapt, but it's a good all-purpose brush here. I think I might actually put a smidgen of phthalo blue in there as well. Phthalo blue stains, but just like when we added the texture medium to color, when you add the iridescent medium to color, and I think it's probably because of the Gum Arabic that's in here as a binder, it does not stain quite as much. So you may be able to lift up colors that before you thought were really, really staining. So just a little smidgen of that phthalo, a little more water in there, so it will move, because see, this paint does not want to like drip quite as much. If I pull it up my palette and it's slanted, it's not dripping down as fast as if I had just that thin marshy color. And I'm just going to go in and add some of that.
Crucible Belle Dupont. Can Prismacolor pencils be used over watercolors?
Oh yes, it's a beautiful technique. They're also beautiful over alcohol markers. And I saw Amazon had like the set of 72 for $18 today. Crazy.
Avada Kedavra. Why is my watercolor not smooth like yours? It keeps granulating and doesn't blend well.
Well, if it's a student grade paint, it could have a lot of fillers in there, and fillers are and extenders are like a chalk that they add to paints to keep the cost down. So that's probably the answer. Or if your paper is really rough, it's not going to flow quite as well. But since you said the paint looks granular, I bet it's a student grade paint. Some pigments are more granular than others. Pigments that are mineral based, like your iron oxide pigments or your ultramarine, something that comes from a rock that's been ground down, basically, those are going to be very granular. But those are also, well, it depends. If it's something like a cheap pigment, like ultramarine's fairly inexpensive, iron's fairly inexpensive. But if it's something like sodalite or cadmium, something like that, you would know, because it'd be expensive, you'd know it was kind of that could be the culprit. But I have a feeling that it's probably student grade paints, because those all tend to be a little bit chalky and granular, which can give you some cool effects, but they can also be frustrating. I'm going to put a little bit more of the iridescent medium in there. You want to make sure you shake up these mediums too before you use them, even if you're using them several times in a paint sitting, because the pigments, the particles of the texture and the particles of the iridescence will settle. So you could end up just getting like a real chunky iridescent stuff, a real chunky texture, and not be getting the medium telpit flow, or to bind it to the paper, and then it could end up flaking off.
Ms. Thrifty50, how do you decide when to consider a painting finished and not keep going on and spoil it?
Gosh, that's really difficult. My best advice for this is to step away when you think it might be done. And it doesn't have to be a long break. You could just, go make yourself a cup of tea, or go for a walk. And then when you come back to it, you're going to be a lot more clear-headed, and you'll be able to see with fresh eyes and know whether you have, your picture is done or not. I'm adding that brown back in because it grayed up a lot. And I want it a little bit warmer. I think I'm going to do some raw sienna in there too to give it a bit of a sandy feeling to the marsh. And when you make your paint thicker like this, it also deters the blooms. So we should end up with a background that doesn't have a lot of blooming in it, because we're not going to puddle. It's the really liquid colors that puddle and give you the blooms. No puddles, no blooms. And also another thing, because these mediums give your paper a little bit of a barrier, and it makes everything thicker, you can actually wipe. Like if you wanted to get kind of like a streaky effect, or you wanted to kind of get some water movement lines, you can actually kind of wipe in. And that the extra gum arabic kind of lubricates the paper, so it doesn't want to pill on you. So there's another thing you can try. So we won't be able to tell how shimmery it is until it dries, and we can always go in and layer more after if we want it more shimmery. So now I'm going to go ahead and do some of the details in the mouth, because I want that to dry, so we'll be able to do our remove our masking fluid. And again, I'm going to mix my ultramarine blue and burnt sienna to get a nice dark. There, that's pretty. And we want this to be more of like a whole milk consistency, so that it doesn't drip on us and we get a nice dark color. And I can rest my hand on top of the seals because they are dry, and I'm just going to go in and with a small brush. This is the number 4 round. You can use whatever you're comfortable with. I know a lot of people like to use the really small ones. I think that you should use the biggest brush that you can handle, because you'll get better brush control, and not only that, you won't fuss around with little details. Get that nose a little darker while we're at it. And so I'm just kind of tapping in where I see the darkest colors from the reference photo. And the reference photo is by Sandy Bell at Paint My Photo. You can see that it's linked up in the video description. And these dark areas are kind of the shadowed areas. So you've got some light behind the sea lions, or seals rather, bouncing off the water. So that's gonna give us a nice dark edge. Just make sure that it's not wet right next to where you're painting. Now I'm gonna clean my brush off, and I'm gonna grab some permanent rose. And I think I'll just pick up a little burnt sienna on there, tap it in just so it's not so bright, and that's what I'm going to paint the tongue. So it's pretty weak permanent rose with a little bit of burnt sienna in there. And then I'm going to, with my brush, I'm not adding anything to it, I'm going to go right into that dark mix that I made.
MD, whoops, question popped out of you. MD Campbell. Most projects I've seen you work on are under 8 by 11. Do you often work large format like 24 by 36?
I used to, but I don't anymore. I used to when I had a separate studio, and before I had kids, I would work with large projects, but yeah, I don't so much anymore. It's difficult to record. Most of my work I do for classes, and it's more time consuming to get the samples done like that, and it's also difficult to record if I'm filming a class. There.
Lisa Burke, are Lightfast ratings industry standards or standards set by each brand?
It's a little bit of both, and it depends. There's a couple scales that that Lightfast ratings go by. There's the British Blue Wool Scale, which is a scale of 1 to 7, 7 and 8 being the best, 1 to 3 being poor, and 4, 5, and 6 being mediocre. But that was more designed, I believe, for dyeing fabrics and dyes versus pigments. And then there's the ASTM Lightfast ratings, and that is a scale of 1 to 3, 1 being the best, 2 being mediocre, and 3 being poor. And then many Eastern companies have their own scale of 1 to 5, and you really have to look up which is good and which is bad. They'll usually have 5 as good and 1 being bad. So there are some industry standards, but not everybody follows the same industry standards, I guess is the long and short of it. So you might see one paint that has like a Lightfast rating of 5, and you're like, how horrible is that? It's worse than 3, but it's actually their best paint. It's not standard at all. So just by putting the mouth and the eye in, I feel like the animal has a lot more character and life. So we can start adding some details now. And most of these details will be done in these browns that we've been making with burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. It's such a handy mix. If you've never mixed your own neutrals and grays, please give that a try, because it's a no-fail approach. And you'll get different results. Like if you use a burnt sienna, like Winsor & Newton's burnt sienna is a PR 101, which is a pigment red 101. It's just kind of like an iron oxide. And most companies use PBR 7, which is my favorite burnt sienna, and it's just a little bit less warm. But both will give you lovely results because you're mixing opposites. Essentially, it's kind of an orange color, and you're mixing it with the blue, so you get that beautiful natural negation of saturation. Now, feeling this, I can feel a subtle texture, but I don't feel like it's sandpaper and it's going to damage my brush. But even so, I am tapping on my color more than brushing on my color, because anytime you use a real rough paper, you do run the risk of kind of flagging the tips of your delicate brushes. So to avoid that, just kind of tap, and then that also will help you impart more texture onto your picture. When I'm doing the wrinkles, when I tap it in there, I get that little texture of the fur that they have as well. I'm a little self-conscious knowing that in Liquid Colors watching, because she does beautiful animals.
She left. She went to go start Christmas decorating.
Oh, she'll be like, oh my gosh, I can't watch her anymore.
No, she was anxious to get her Christmas decorating started. I'm waiting till the 1st.
Yeah, I haven't not KonMari'd my Christmas decorations yet, so that's what I got to make sure I'm ready to do that when I bring them down, because usually when the kids want to decorate, I have like no interest. So I just kind of like bring down a few boxes of stuff I can tolerate having out, and then they just, you know, put it up everywhere. But this year we're going to go through everything. We went through all of our fall decorations.
Yeah. Well, you were saying you got rid of a bunch of stuff.
We did, yeah. Yeah, but I haven't touched the Christmas stuff yet, so.
I did. I got rid of some stuff last year. I have a feeling as I go through stuff again this year, I'll be donating more.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just because, and I like to make a lot of decorations, but like then the next year, I have no desire to keep them. I mean, unless it's something that my children made, you know, and it has that sentimental attachment. But if it's something I've made, I could care less about keeping it. Probably sounds horrible, but you know, I just make so much stuff that, and some stuff just gets crushed, you know.
You can't keep everything forever.
Yeah. And that's kind of how I am. If I have a bunch of things that I've made, and I don't want to make any more things, and then I'm depressed because I'm not making things. So it's just a
yeah.
I'm skipping around and doing the darkest areas first, so I will be adding in some other shades in there, but I just want to kind of get these in off the bat. When you want bigger spots, simply press your brush more. Or switch brushes if you feel like you're doing the exact same spot everywhere.
I do have to go through my wrapping supplies, though. I can't remember what I have left.
I went through all of mine recently, and I think that I love to do like brown paper wrapping and then do some like rustic tags and stuff. So I think I'm actually thinking about doing a video of 5 different ways to Christmas wrap with brown paper, so that, you know, you just have to have that one roll of brown, and then you can kind of soup it up there.
I inherited after Grandma passed.
Yep.
Like she moved and then
Yeah.
passed. I inherited a lot of her wrapping paper and Mom's wrapping paper.
Yeah.
And some of it was still sealed in the plastic.
Oh my
and I'm like,
gosh.
I can't justify
Throwing it away.
it away. So I've been using, and I'm down. I have one roll left. I know, and I think I have a couple other like random chunks of leftovers. So yeah.
Yeah, I usually just get enough to like get me through the season, or at least that's what I try to do, so I don't have to store it. I'm not one of those people that run out and buy like all the wrapping paper the day after Christmas, because
no. The only thing John and I are going to do this year is we want to get a new everlasting Christmas tree, because we rotate years.
Oh, like when you plant? Like a live one?
No. 1 year we do a live one year we do the fake one.
Yeah.
I call it everlasting, evergreen.
Oh, okay.
Sounds nicer than a fake Christmas tree.
I love my fake Christmas tree.
So we have one that's almost 10 years old. It's not quite as fresh looking.
Yeah. Not quite as pricky.
So the only thing we're planning on going out to buy after Christmas is maybe a tree, if we can find one.
Yeah. We got a new one a few years ago, and it's pre-lit, which is like the best thing ever. You don't have to mess with the lights. It's in like 3 chunks instead of like a bazillion little branches you have to poke into a pole.
Yes, but when those lights go out, there's no way to...
I know.
Also,
You just add more.
I like red and white lights, and you can't, like, you can either get white or multicolored.
Yeah.
In particular.
I'm particular about not having a real tree. But, you know, I remember being a little kid and putting together the fake tree, and I loved it. And the one year we went out and got a tree. My dad took me out of the woods with a snowmobile, and we chopped down a tree. And that thing was the most pitiful looking tree. It, like, by the time Christmas came along, I don't think there was a single, like, single little spindle on it. It was all just like this Charlie Brown Christmas tree. It was so bad. And my mother would curse every day, vacuuming up the
I can hear it. One year
let your father get a real tree. Oh, it was funny.
We did that one year, Dad and Rachel and I, and we chopped down the tree, went to our neighbor's, backwoods there, chopped it down, brought it back to the house, put it in the basement, to let it warm up. Yeah. And got up, and the house smelled awful. We had gotten a skunk pine tree.
Oh my gosh.
Which, when it's like warm and not cold, it like gives off the aroma of kind of like skunk.
Oh no, I've never heard of that.
I hadn't neither until so we had to pitch it outside and get a different one.
Oh my gosh, that's funny. Ah, memories. I'm dabbing in some raw sienna. And again, use yellow ochre if you want. I think raw sienna is a smidgen more transparent. It's also, it doesn't have as natural of a look, I guess I would say. I feel like yellow ochre is just one of those very complementary colors to, or it just enhances a lot of other colors really well. Raw sienna isn't quite as easy to work with. And you know, that's another thing. Like if you're not sure about a color and you're like, should I add this to my palette? We mentioned Cotman paints before. You can go and pick up a tube of like raw sienna or mauve or phthalo blue or whatever it is that you want to try out, and try it out for, you know, $2.50 versus, you know, trying it out for $15, and see if that's a color that you actually would use. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think that we almost have a prejudice against paint, and we can be determined that a paint is not going to be satisfactory before we actually use it. And on the other hand, I think somebody could give you a tube of paint and say that, oh, it's Schmincke, it's wonderful, and it could be something completely different. But if you think that it's going to be a good paint, then it's kind of like a magic feather. You think you're going to paint a great painting with it. All right, I feel like maybe I have a little too much of that burnt sienna in there. I'm going to blot that off. And then we're going to go work on this guy for a bit, give our eyes a break from the big seal. And I'm going to start with a little burnt sienna up on the head because it does have a little bit of a more reddish cast up there. And again, tapping. I switched over to the number 8 round. You can use whatever's comfortable for you. I like it because it's got a nice point, so I can go in with a tiny little tap, or I could go press it more and get a bigger tap. The key is I don't want these two animals to be exactly the same, so they will stand out from one another. I'm doing the same technique, just kind of tapping it in there. If you're painting along at home, then we're just keeping on here. And you might try a little bit of the iridescent medium and some ultramarine blue on a few spots on this seal, because this one looks like it just came out of the water and it has some kind of glistening blue reflections, and I think that might be a nice thing to capture with our iridescent medium as well. And that texture is helping us not leave brush strokes. It's kind of breaking up the pigment a little bit, like as if we were working on a rough paper. But I don't have my brush is still pretty like, you can see, like if I bend it over, the bristles will spread apart. It's not very wet. There isn't a lot of paint on there. I'm doing a little bit of brushing just to get the fur in there, and I'm going to spread the bristles out a little bit on there. And that will help me get a little bit of a dry brush effect. I need a little more paint though. Ultramarine blue and burnt sienna again. And this probably goes without saying, but I do know we often have new people in the chat. When you use up a pan of color, you can refill it with a tube. So like when a pan goes low, I just squirt some in from a tube. You can buy it from the same brand. Any brand that sells pans will generally sell their paint in tubes as well, unless it's like a craft brand. They might not have refills, but any art supply brand that you have will sell it in tubes or pans. And I think it's more economical in tubes. And some companies, well actually one company, Winsor Newton, will tell you that it's different and you should not refill it with their tube paints. But I think that's just a marketing ploy because I do it all the time and I've never had an issue of it not being vibrant.
Lisa Burke, is the paint sitting on top of the medium like Yupo? Does that mean it takes longer to dry or easier to lift off?
Well, that texture medium, if you apply it down to your paper and then you paint over it, it doesn't seem like it takes a lot longer for these layers to dry, because like if I touch over here, those that I've painted on top are already dry. The initial drying takes longer because it's like the paint is itself just thicker and more viscous. But after that layer with the texture medium's dry and you go over it, it doesn't seem to increase the drying time. It's just that first initial drying time where you have that thick medium in there.
Sandra Baca, have you used any of the Dilutions line?
The only thing I've used of hers, and I don't think I've used it enough to really comment on it, I mean, it seems fine, is her white spray ink. That's the only thing I've used of hers. I've heard wonderful things about it though, but I tend to make my own spray inks, and I don't use acrylics that often, and I already have plenty of acrylics, so I've never invested in her acrylic paints, although I've heard they're lovely. And she does have nice colors, so I haven't personally used them, but I wouldn't hesitate to recommend her products.
Kendall McCauley, I just purchased the Royal Langnickel pearlescent paints. Could I substitute those if I have no medium?
Oh, sure. You might want to, like, if you are definitely using like a certain shade of blue in your background, just pick the like blue iridescent color that's closest and just mix them together.
Mary Shen, what ultramarine brand of paint do you recommend that does not granulate and is very transparent and flowy?
For the thing I love about ultramarine paint is that it does granulate, and that it and the more granulation, the more I like it. But I think Schmincke's granulates the least out of any brand. I think they've milled theirs finer. But personally, I like Daniel Smith's French ultramarine because it granulates so much. But it doesn't sound like that's what you would prefer. So Schmincke for that one. Or you might even try like Dr. P.H. Martin's, the liquid watercolors. Their ultramarine might not granulate quite as much. Their Radiance definitely wouldn't, but that's a dye-based color, and then you're going to sacrifice light-fast ratings. So that's the thing you do have to worry about if you're going just for non-granulation, is that a lot of like really transparent, clear colors are not as light-fast. I'm going to turn this so that I can get right up against that area where they meet and darken this seal in behind. And it's just easier if I'm pointing my brush towards that area. I'm kind of curious about picking up a bottle of that granulation medium. Let's see if I can find it somewhere.
Christmas is coming.
Oh,
good
that's
stocking
true.
stuffer.
That would be a good stocking stuffer.
Fits right nicely right into a Christmas stocking.
That would. Oh, that's another thing. These bottles are great. Don't leave them on their side. I have had one leak before, so always keep them upright. And I mean, that could have just been me. I might have replaced the cap because I broke the cap on one once and then just had to I found a soda cap that fit. So that could have been, that's probably why it happened. But after that, I was like, oh, I am not putting that on the side anymore. Okay, so now I got to decide whether I want grass or sand under the sea lions.
Grass.
You want grass?
Only because it's fall and almost winter here, so.
Oh, so you want to see grass? Okay, we could do grass.
But if you feel up to the challenge of doing sand, especially because you have the texture medium.
I really don't think that that it would matter either way, really. Maybe I'll do some sand and I'll put some grass poking out.
Perfect.
Yeah, I want to do that. Okay.
Bev Roberts, where can I buy liquid watercolors brands? All I can find are Dr. P.H. Martin and Blickhouse brands.
Well, those are probably the most common ones in the United States. Ecoline is another brand that I think is more worldwide. I would probably, it depends on what you're going to do with them. If you are just getting liquid watercolors to play around with, like in an art journal or make spray inks and stuff like that, I would not hesitate to use the Blick brand. I use that to refill my spray ink bottles and for kids crafts, and they're super bright. Also the Sargent brand, S&S Recreation has a good brand. There's nothing wrong with any of those. But if you want something that is light fast, then I think Dr. P.H. Martin's is almost your only option. I don't know about the Ecoline, if those are light fast or not. If anyone knows in chat, I've never used them, please post and let us know. The Dr. P.H. Martin Radiance would be brighter, however they are not light fast, and they even say it right on there, right on the packaging. So to make my sand color, I am doing burnt sienna, raw sienna, and ultramarine blue. And I want some texture, so I'm just going to kind of have that background real wet. So if you want more texture and you have granulating colors, the wetter your paper, the more they're going to granulate, because the more that pigment can float and settle. I don't. That raw sienna is really yellow on its own, so that's why I'm mixing it down before I go in and add it anywhere. I want the sand in front to be brighter because it would be away from the water more, and drier, and also lighter because it's closer to the viewer. And to make it more shadowy, just have more burnt sienna and more ultramarine. And I'm going to darken that up before I go in with some texture medium. I think I will do that texture medium in the sand. I don't think it will. Whoa, that's really blue. That needs to be mixed out. Some shadows here. And I can tap in a little bit of texture medium. Actually, hey, let's mix texture medium and iridescent medium because sand is sparkly.
Ooh,
let's
sand
do
is
both.
sparkly.
Let's do. I'll just sprinkle. I'll put texture medium right on top of the drops of iridescent medium. So I mean, vice versa. I'll do texture medium and then I'll do little bits of the iridescent medium. And it won't be too crazy sparkly because of all the earth pigments we have there. They're gonna, they do just naturally are more opaque, so they're gonna be naturally. They'll cover up. They'll dull some of the sparkle. There. Now we'll just mix that around with our brush. Start with the darker areas first, since I already have that on my brush. The chat is quiet today. Are there any questions popping up, or?
There have been a few, but Joe's taking care of one. Joe and Eve are helping one girl with a yellow question.
Okay.
A few others that I have answered. When I don't misread the question, blame it on the ham.
Okay, I think while I have this thick texture medium down, I'm going to use the bevel end of one of my brushes to scratch in some grass, and then it'll have some nice grass texture just from that. Let's see how this one does. This one, oh, this will work good. And I can go in and paint those areas after. You have the benefit of actually you're scraping down you're squeegeeing off the paint, but you're also kind of leaving those highlights and everything in, so it'll be easy to deal with. I had, oh, there we go, my little Majestic brush here. You can kind of pull some of that. You can pull some of those grasses up over the flippers, so you'll have a little bit of that texture there as well. It's very easy to scrape in this because it's almost like paste paper, if you've ever done that. And you scrape through the glue on the paper to give some cool textures. It's kind of the same idea.
Kendall McCauley, when looking at pigment info, some of my colors have the same pigment listed, but they are different colors. How do I figure that out?
Well, because the way that they grind the pigments can alter the color. So like PR101 can be anywhere from an earthy burnt sienna all the way up to a rich burgundy, like a Indian red or a English red. So it's just how finely they mill the color. Usually your pigments will be very similar if they come from the same pigment, but there are little variances because of grinding and how much binder and extenders manufacturers add to them. All right, I think I can remove that masking fluid now, and I'm using this rubber cement pickup.
Leah G, have you ever used Daniel Smith's iridescent watercolors?
I got a dark dot card of them, but that's it. I really didn't see much of a benefit to those versus some other cheaper iridescent paints I had, so I never invested in the big tubes. Like the Prima iridescent paints are actually really nice, and they're quite cheap compared to like Finetech or Daniel Smith. You just want to make sure that your paper around the area where you're removing the masking fluid is dry, so you don't smear your paint into the masking fluid. Oh yeah, I was going to take that off because I had a big smudge there, but I'll show you how to paint things back in around misplaced masking fluid. Teachable moment. Oh man, it keeps up my hand in that wet paint though. That's a bummer.
Yeah. Leah G, does using iridescent paints make it not a traditional watercolor anymore?
I bet that would have an effect. Yeah, that probably would. Again, I would check with any competition that you're thinking about joining, because I bet that one somebody will have a stink about that. All right.
What?
So I'm just going in. Luckily, I still have these mixes on my palette. So that's a good reason not to wash off your palette unless you have to while you're in the middle of a painting. And I'm just going to go in and paint around those whiskers there. But I do like using that little bottle. That worked pretty well.
That's a rubber cement eraser, right?
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, actually, you can get a huge chunk of it. It's about like that long, and it's probably 2 inches by 2 inches by 2 inches by 2 inches square. It's probably about, I don't know, 8 inches long or so, maybe even longer at Harbor Freight, and you can just cut a slice off of it. It's meant for cleaning like grinding wheels in your wood shop. And you know, if you go through a lot of it, or you also happen to need something to clean your grinding wheels, then that's a good bet, because I had lost mine and my husband had that, and I was like, hey, that looks like the same exact thing. And just kind of puttering around and adding some details. You usually have to finesse the masking fluid covered areas back in after you're done, after you remove them. That usually are not, unless it's just like a little sliver of highlight on the glass, they usually need to be worked back in a little bit.
Lisa Burke, my backgrounds tend to look messy where they meet figures. Any tips?
Probably because you're trying to paint around the figures, and then it's kind of hard to get them to be smooth. I guess I would say that wetting your entire background area first and leaving the figures dry and then adding your color in should give you a smooth background, because then you don't have to mess around with trying to paint like back and forth up next to a figure. You just let the paint kind of flow into all the wet areas, and that should give you a better effect. And use a liftable color in the background, such as ultramarine blue or another color that you know will lift off the paper well, so that way if you do get a real hard edge where the background and the figure meet, you can soften that with a firm damp brush like this. You can just kind of scrub an edge and blot it and then soften that, so you don't have like that hard edge like you would get with masking fluid. I'm going to dry this ground here, and then I can put a few grasses in.
Mary shows, can you trim the tip of watercolor brushes with scissors to restore the point?
I've trimmed off like stray bristles that have like kind of pulled out that are a little bit longer than the rest. If you're going to throw away the brush otherwise, then there's no harm in trying it. Generally, what you could do is, and this is again a brush that you're not you don't care about too much, you could kind of brush it across some sandpaper, and that will kind of sand down the edges and should pull your tips back into a point. It is kind of wearing them down a little bit, but it also makes them a little more likely to fall in line. I've had to do that with some synthetics that I bought that wouldn't really hold my paint very well. Memory fingers. I'll let that dry a little bit more on its own. I think I'm going to, because I do notice, like, when you heat up a medium, like the iridescent medium, there is a little bit of an odor to it. It's not very pleasant. I'm going to grab some more of this iridescent ultramarine color here and add some little highlights onto the back of the seals. In fact, I think I'm going to do a little bit more of the iridescent medium. And those will be like the shiny wet spots on the fur and the skin where he just got out of the water. Like, he got out of the water to go give that guy a heck for something.
Or maybe they're long lost relatives.
Maybe.
Meeting each other again for the first time.
Could be. The caption that the photographer said something like, "Be quiet, you'll wake the babies," or something like that.
Ah.
Stop yelling, you'll wake the babies. So you do want to be fair. So I did put a little bit of the phthalo blue in there because I had used that in the background, and you do want to be fairly conservative with this. I'm just putting it where I see the glimmer on the reference photo, and I know it looks like the seal has some 70s eyeshadow on, but hopefully when it's all dry it'll make sense. And then on this one it looks like he's got a little bit of that reflection around his eye and on his mouth and a little bit on the nose. So even though the transparent, the iridescent medium is transparent, it still will show up because those little mica particles are not transparent, and they're what catches the light. And now I am going to do some grasses, and I have not used any green yet, but I'm going to see if I can do raw sienna and phthalo blue and see what kind of green that gives me, because I don't have a really bright yellow yet in the composition. So, oh, there we go, we get a pretty good green there. So I didn't know if I'd be able, I didn't want it too mucky of a green. I think that green's going to be all right. I'm using the tip of the brush, just kind of flicking that in there in the same direction that I scraped. Really sparse because it's on the beach. And my paint is about the consistency of, well, let's say about 2% milk. It's not too thick, it's not too thin. Do some of that over here as well. You could use a liner brush for this, actually. I think I'll mix it up and then switch to a liner brush. It's hard to mix with a liner because the brushes are too floppy. And the liner brush is a liner because it's got a long bristles like that. What's everyone chatting about? I feel like I'm like missing the conversation.
Pretty quiet for the moment.
I know the stream's going long. Hopefully people haven't all bailed.
Nope, we have 237.
Cool. I'm going in with just some raw sienna on its own too. I mean, there's still some green on the brush, just to give it a little bit of a variety. Usually you do have some kind of like deader grasses that are a little more yellow. I'd love to know what the folks in chat think about watercolor mediums, if it's something that they would add to their repertoire, or if they don't really feel that they're necessary for the looks that they're trying to create. I don't use them very often myself, but I do find them fun to work with. putting some laying down grasses here. Like the seal has just kind of smushed them, matted them down. And this is 140 pound Arches watercolor paper. I didn't tape it, but it's only like about 11 by 8, so I just clipped it on all 4 sides, and that was fine for the amount of water that we're putting down. We didn't soak it at any time, so we didn't have any issues with it buckling.
Mary Shows and Bev Roberts are going to be trying the texture medium.
Cool.
And Suzanne Hale loves watercolor mediums.
Cool. I'm throwing in some of this dark mix on my palette to give some shadows to the grass.
Gail AC has been learning how to use the masking medium.
Good.
I bet a lot of people have had 1 or 2 of these in their stash and haven't used them yet.
Yeah, I bet.
But now that they're seeing how it can be used, they're gonna pull them out. And what else are you gonna do this weekend? It's long, wonderful holiday weekends.
Gosh, I don't know. I don't really have any plans yet, but my husband has to work for a little bit tomorrow. But other than that, I don't have any plans. So, you guys doing anything fun?
John's his 48 hours on base starts tomorrow morning.
Oh, okay.
A friend of mine needs to go pick up her new car. It's a couple-hour drive, so I'm gonna go with her.
Yeah.
That's all I've got planned. Nothing super exciting.
I think it'd be nice just to have a quiet weekend, actually, and maybe get the house decorated. I don't know. I usually don't decorate until at least into December, but I'm kind of anxious to go through all those.
Even KonMari while you're deciding what you're going to put where.
Yeah, and also I like to decorate the porch, and I don't have any like I think our garlands kind of had their last hurrah last year, so I think we need some new garlands, and I also want to do ribbons like up the posts on our porch. So
check AC Morino this time of year. They always have like their garlands and their Christmas ribbon like 40 or 50% off.
I saw it in their flyer, it said 60% off the ribbons. So, but I'm like, oh, it's today and tomorrow. I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if I can.
Well, I mean, if you want to break, you could go tonight, because I worked a couple of evening shifts Black Fridays there.
Yep.
And it was fine.
Oh yeah, okay.
It was not crazy.
Yeah, I think probably the diehards get out in the morning. You know, because there's so many other stores that have deals and they're just out and about anyway. So I'm just giving this one final look and deciding if I want to do anything else in the water in the background. I feel like I like this green, and I would kind of like to add a little bit of that in there. Because, you know, you got seaweed and stuff. I think that would be kind of a nice way to integrate that color, since even though we didn't use any new colors, we did have a new mix. I think that would be good in the background. And of course, if you did not mask out the whiskers and you feel like you want a little bit more in there, you can go ahead and just use a white gel pen or an X-Acto knife, and you can scrape some of that out. Oh, that's bright.
Split Gug. Oops. Would M. Graham be a good brand if I laid down paint thick? I'm scared it won't dry or leave a sheen.
I wouldn't recommend laying down watercolor paint thickly. Maybe what you want is a gouache, because the paint really should be fairly thin to bond to the paper. You might even prefer using acrylics on paper if you want to work on paper and you want a thicker paint, because you can water that down. Acrylics, you do not have to pay attention to the binding ratio with acrylics if you're working on paper, because it's an absorbent substrate. So I think that's what I'd recommend you use if you want to go thickly, because that won't crack or flake off, and if you go with an acrylic gouache, then it won't flake or have any shiny spots. So I think that might work better with your technique. I mean, I don't know exactly what you're doing, but generally you don't want to put the watercolors too thick, because gum arabic is not a strong binder. It's enough binder to adhere a thin veil of watercolor to paper, but it's not like an acrylic where it's designed to really, have that strength. And I'm just going to hit this really quick with the dryer. And I think I might actually do a few darker whiskers with a liner brush in here just to kind of give them a little bit more order, because I feel like those white masked lines are a little too stark right now. If you have any questions before we wrap up the show, just get them in the chat at this point, because we're almost done this painting. And then you'll be able to see how much shimmer and texture and stuff we got from our medium use. Okay, so grab my liner brush. Where did that go? I need to clean my studio. It's really messy. I'm going to take ultramarine and burnt sienna again to make it dark. And my paper's dry mostly. I just put my hand in something. But when I am using the liner, I do like to rest my hand on something just so I have a little bit of control. I'm not trying to paint over the light lines. I'm just trying to paint these darker ones amongst them. If you try to like line them up exactly with the white that you've painted, it's just going to look awkward. So you just want to just paint them in normally. I'm going to move this. And it's usually a little bit darker around the base where the whiskers come out anyway, so if you start on the muzzle and you pull the whiskers out, it does look a little more natural. I don't want to do too much of this one. I kind of like how that came out. I think I'd learned that masking tip a little bit better by the time I came over here. Always make sure you're comfortable when you're doing this technique with a liner brush, because it's really easy to get an awkward looking line if you're not comfortable with, if you're trying to push the brush when you should be pulling it. And I think that pretty much does it. What do you think, Sarah?
I think it's done.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much. I'm just going to take this off the board so you can kind of see it. I don't have a pretty white border to show you because I was thinking, oh, maybe I'll mount it because it has a nice deckled edge, but I don't know. I think I probably will end up matting that because I don't like the way the edges look so much. I mean, it's all right, I guess. But I think they're cute, and we can see what we got for iridescence, hopefully in the background. Because we had mixed it with color, it's not super shiny in the water. I think I can catch it. If you look right here where I'm pointing and I tip it, you can see a little bit of sparkle there. So that's got a pretty look. I think it looks a little more like a sandy texture than glistening on the. I really like the texture of the seals. It's hard to see that texture, but you can feel it a little bit, and you can see what it did when we dry brushed over it. It kind of imparted some of that texture there. Not quite as pronounced as when you just have a flat wash and nothing layered on top. It kind of gives you that kind of scaly look, but it's definitely something to try. And of course, if you were doing like a big rock with barnacles on it, dripping the texture medium in there will give you a really awesome look. If you have any questions after the replay, go ahead and type them in the comments section and I will pop in and answer them. Please give this video a thumbs up before you go. That really helps this video reach more people, because YouTube recommends things based on whether you like them or not. So that really helps. And I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. Don't forget about the sale, 50% off classes in my online school. Links are in the description, as well as links to everything I used today. Is that everything?
I think so.
Okay. Thank you guys so much for watching. Until next time, happy crafting.